Welcome everyone to our current installment of our coffee break webinar, Optimizing Success Strategies to Leverage Program Evaluation for Project Implementation. We're so thrilled to have you here with us. And before we jump into everything, I do real quickly have to wish my mother a happy birthday. Hi, Mom, happy birthday. And because I know Dad is watching this with you because they always watch. Hi, Dad, and hope you have a great time celebrating Mom's birthday today. So with that kind of out of the way, let me go ahead and get started with kind of setting the context for today's conversation. So in thinking about projects and in project implementation, one of the ways that you can think about them is to think about them as puzzle pieces. And I think in terms of projects that have worked with grant-funded work, I think this is an analogy that will resonate, that there's a lot of different pieces that are involved, a lot of things that you have to really put together to be able to successfully implement an initiative. Sometimes project teams are challenged a bit in regards to thinking about then, where does evaluation fit within this puzzle and all these various pieces? Particularly because when introduced to program evaluation, it's called things like external evaluation, third-party, independent. And what we really want to be able to do today is build the case around the idea that you shouldn't think about evaluation as something separate to project implementation, rather that it's an integral part of implementation, and that's how you're going to be able to really optimize success. So with that in context, there are three things that we want to be able to share. First, we really want to be able to emphasize what the value of evaluation is, beyond the motivation of some project teams around doing evaluation because it's required. And so really giving a 360 view of that. The other piece that we want to be able to do is give strategies around how do you actually optimize success? What are some of the things that you can actually do from a practical level to be able to leverage your evaluation for optimization of project implementation? And of course, as always, we want to make sure that we're answering your questions. So to help us in this conversation, I am absolutely thrilled to have with us Dr. Yvette Pearson. I've had the privilege of working with Yvette on a variety of projects over the last couple of years, and I just have immense amount of respect for her. And she's well respected in the education research space, some education research space as well. And she really brings a unique perspective to this conversation as a principal investigator, evaluator, and program officer. So with that, let me turn things over to Yvette for a few moments so that she can share more about her background. Yvette?
Thank you so much, and it is such a pleasure to get a chance to tag team with the great Dr. Rux on this webinar. I always tell people that Lana is the evaluator's evaluator, so that truly is the case with our relationship. So again, thank you for having me. A little bit about my background in evaluation. It really started as what a lot of faculty members, especially in engineering, which is my disciplinary area, a lot of folks think of assessment and continuous improvement, especially when it comes to accreditation as the grunge work that nobody wants to do. And that's really where my journey with assessment and evaluation started, leading assessment committees for our undergraduate programs as we were being visited and revisited by Yvette. And so that grew into greater levels of responsibility with assessment and continuous improvement. And as Lana mentioned, as I evolved from my work on educational research projects as a PI and co-PI, later became a program officer at NSF. During that time, I was blessed to be able to complete a graduate certificate in educational research methodology. And not long, I guess around the same time I completed that is when I started the Peer Group, which is my consulting firm. And so, I am in a unique position that I get to wear all three hats. And I'm excited to be able to share with you from different lenses with those hats on.
Fabulous. Thank you so much for that. And thank you for your kind words as well. So if you don't know who I am Lana Rux, Principal Consultant with the Rux Group, and we're a research and program evaluation firm that gathers, analyzes, and interprets data to enable our clients to measure the impact of their work. So for close to 15 years, we've had the privilege of working with a number of project teams from higher education institutions with federally funded work. So that's a bit about me. Let me turn things over to Elise so that she can share who she is and what her role is on this coffee break webinar as well. So Elise.
Hello, it's so nice to have everyone here this afternoon. As Lana mentioned, my name is Elise Hopes and I am the Outreach Coordinator for the Rux Group. For today's webinar, however, I will be facilitating the Q&A portions, and we have a few Q&A portions sprinkled throughout the webinar. And so as questions may emerge for you, feel free to drop that in the question box, which you can find on the right side of your screen, and it's denoted by that little question mark symbol. I should say too that there's a little bit of a delay from the time that you send the questions and we actually receive them on our end. So if we don't get to your question during that particular segment, we'll do our best to get to it at the next segment. And anything that we don't get to, we'll be sure to follow up with you all in email. Additionally, there is a chat function which we may use to communicate additional resources as those emerge. And with the chat function, it will only appear when there's a new message for you to review. So be sure to look out for any notifications that may pop up. With that, I'll go ahead and pass it back over to you, Lana.
All right, great. Thanks, Elise. So let's go ahead and jump into our conversation for today. And let's first start talking about the value of evaluation. And as I was alluding to when creating the context for this conversation, I referenced the fact that very often individuals may be initially motivated to complete evaluation because it's required. And there's a lot of value of evaluation beyond that. So I'm wondering, Yvette, from your perspective of the multiple different lenses that you wear, if you can talk about what the value of evaluation is through that lens of a PI, evaluator, and program officer.
Sure, there are a lot of different values that are really all related to all three different roles, and I would say to different degrees within each of the three different roles. So on the screen, we have triangles that represent PI teams, pentagons that represent evaluators, and squares that represent program officers. And we're differentiating with the shading to show that the solid shapes are emphasizing primary areas of focus, while the striped shapes are indicating the secondary areas. And so with that, I'll kind of walk through each of these. With all projects, as PIs, one of our primary areas of focus should be understanding our successes and also understanding our challenges, because those, I look at hurdles as something designed to be overcome, kind of like running a race. Hurdles are designed to overcome, and you don't win a race by running around the hurdles. You have to jump over them. And so as a PI, you really want to have that deep understanding. And also, program officers and evaluators have an interest in that as well. Program officers want to understand the challenges you're facing. I know during my time as a program officer, when I saw in an annual report that a PI team was having a particular challenge, it may be that I might have run into that challenge myself with a project, or I might have seen that challenge come up with another project. And sometimes I would just pick up the phone and call the PI and say, hey, I noticed you're having a challenge with this. Might I offer some suggestions that might be helpful? And so PIs can have those kind of communications with the program officers to help overcome those hurdles. And also, of course, understanding and communicating those successes. Another important part is learning what works and what doesn't. You don't want to keep trying things and you know this doesn't work, but I'm gonna try it again one more time. And so after you run into the wall enough times, you should know, hey, I should probably try to go through another way. And so it's important to learn what works and what doesn't. And again, it's very important to both the PI and the program officers to know this. For PIs, I think it's pretty clear. Again, like I said, you don't want to keep trying something in a way that doesn't work. You want to figure out how to do it differently. For the program officers, I know as PIs, it's our tendency a lot of times to talk about all of the great things that are going on with our project, and when we in the annual report don't necessarily want to communicate the problems and what's not working, whereas your program officer wants to see what's not working. Not only can they be helpful in the way that I described earlier, but it also helps to inform them when they're thinking about the portfolio, when they're thinking about how to write that next solicitation and what they're looking for and how they're guiding the PI community on, approaches and what should be included. They want to know what's not working so that they can make sure to avoid those things in future calls. And of course, and maybe this would have been an overarching bubble, but informing continuous improvement. You want to make sure that you're always learning from the results of the evaluation, implementing what you need to implement to go to the next step, and with an eye toward continuous improvement. And that's very important for both the PI and the evaluator to really have that communication between the two, to be able to say, hey, this is how we get from point A to point B to point C, and ultimately to where you're trying to get to with the outcomes of your project. And then I would say, and I probably missed shading the program officer as a solid here, but demonstrating impact is very important. For the PI, you want to demonstrate to your program officer that they made a good investment when they decided to recommend your proposal for funding. You want to demonstrate to your institution that you're contributing to the institution's mission and growth. And then program officers also want to be able to communicate the impact of their work when they're going for future funding. They want to be able to say that, hey, our PIs have been able to accomplish this or advance knowledge in this area. And so it's very important to be able to demonstrate the impact of the work. And while we have these circles lined up, I want to communicate that these are not necessarily linear processes. These are really continuous improvement cycles within themselves. So one area can inform the other. So as you understand successes and hurdles and learn what works and doesn't work, you're feeding back information into your process to continue to grow that understanding. As you learn what works and doesn't work, you're informing your continuous improvement, and your continuous improvement is going back to help to kind of test and evaluate what's going on in your project. And then the continuous improvement is informing how you communicate your impact or demonstrate your impact. And then as you look at that and thinking of impact, not just being at the end of the project, but those milestones along the way, that you can come back and say, okay, we saw this, now how can we grow that? And that's continuous improvement process in itself. So I just wanted to share those 4 ways. There are probably many others. You probably could have added 10 more to this list, I'm sure, Lana.
I think that those are excellent points. And, one of the ways I conceptualize what you were sharing is that, sometimes in the project teams may think that there are really competing views and competing goals around these 3 different roles. And what's really nice about what you're sharing is that really everyone's rowing in the same direction. There may be different emphasis, different ways in the view that you look at it, but everyone's really rowing in the same direction, trying to accomplish the same goal. And the other piece I thought was really cool too that you said was that hurdles are something to jump over, not get around. So some really great points.
Yes.
So why don't we pause there for a moment to see if there are any questions? Elise?
Yes, we do already have a question. So you mentioned that the program officer is interested in what works and what doesn't work. Can you speak to this a bit more, and in what instances the program officer would not necessarily be supportive if something didn't work?
Yeah, so when program officers are evaluating the projects that they're planning to recommend or not for funding, a couple of the things that they're looking at are for the potential to contribute to the body of knowledge or to whatever outcomes the funding program is designed to attain. And with that, they understand that there is risk involved. And so you'll hear the term high risk, high reward. And so sometimes with some of the things that are going to be the most transformative, you see a lot of potential for risk of it actually not working. And so there's a balance that they're trying to reach. So they don't expect everything to work out perfectly. They just want to understand that 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 there are plans in place. So when you're looking at the proposal, you have a well conceived plan in place. If we knew what was going to work, especially if we're talking about research versus implementation, if we knew the answers already, we wouldn't need to research it. And so there is inherent risk in all projects. So what they always want to know is if things aren't working, how are you mitigating the challenges? What are you doing to shift directions, and how are you dealing with those things that are not working? And like I said, it also helps so that the next time, if for instance, a lot of times you'll see solicitations that are a bit more prescriptive. Some of them are a bit more prescriptive than others. That helps to inform what goes into the solicitations as well. And also what you'll notice in the solicitations, and I'm speaking with an NSF hat on because that's where I work, so I know different agencies are different. But within the solicitations, you'll also see them pointing to literature that will help inform how you shape and how you conceptualize your proposal. And a lot of that literature actually comes from projects that NSF has funded. And so it's a way, again, to shape, to share, hey, this has worked in the past or this hasn't worked in the past, in a way that helps inform what goes into future projects.
Those are all really great points. And if there are more questions, we'll just hold those for a moment just so that we can go to the next point. And I think what you were bringing up is an excellent segue for our next conversation, which is in regards to really talking about using evaluation findings. And I think that what you were talking about before in terms of continuous improvement and the opportunity to have evaluation inform that process. I guess the question in this case is really from a practical standpoint, what can you provide in terms of suggestions to project owners, the project team, the PI, to really be able to incorporate the findings for project implementation?
Yeah, actually, for this one, I'm really happy that you started with your puzzle because, as you mentioned, a lot of times people think, oh, it is an external evaluator, and they have the evaluator disconnected from the team. And as you and I both know, it's not uncommon to get that frantic email a week before the proposal is due and say, hey, I need an evaluator. And so for that, I say begin with the end in mind, which doesn't seem like it really answers your question, but it really does, because your evaluator should be involved from the very start. And your evaluator can help you define outcomes that are measurable. They can provide insights on what has and has not worked from prior experience. And so having that conversation and having your evaluator integrated with your team at that point, at the very beginning of conceptualizing your project, is so key to actually getting findings that you can do something with. And so the next thing is to think about how, when you get the results from the evaluator, don't think about it in terms of, okay, it's time for the annual report. I need an evaluation report. Can you get it to me? My report is going to be overdue in a week, and I have another proposal that's pending. So you don't want your evaluation relationship to work that way. Optimally, you'll be engaging your evaluator throughout the year. They'll be engaged in project meetings because the evaluator wants to observe and needs to observe the process. They need to be privy to the conversations, to the complexities, to the challenges, so that they can make an evaluation of the process itself and also provide feedback that helps you with that process. And also they can document and assess findings toward your outcome all along. So it's not necessarily just one time a year, depending on the nature of your project. And so what that's doing is providing you information in a what I call a just-in-time sort of way that informs your internal decision making, which is huge because what you don't want to do is wait until you get into that mode where I need this evaluation report and you don't even have a chance to digest the findings and use them to plan for what's to come next. So that evaluation communication in an ongoing way is very critical to internal decision making. And then a third point would be thinking about going back to our last bubble on the last question is communicating the impact. Again, you're not waiting till the 5-year project is over to talk about impact. You're looking for those little nuggets along the way. And so as you have those conversations with your evaluator, they're able to highlight those impacts that are standing out. And if you notice in your NSF annual report, there's always a section for you to describe your significant findings or significant achievements or accomplishments. And that's where you say, okay, we're only a year in, but we were able to recruit X number of students, or we were able to get out a paper our first year. And so those sorts of things, or if you see something that you've learned that has gone into practice at your institution, those are impacts you want to be able to communicate along the way and not just at the end of the project.
Good. Really excellent points. So I am not going to take a moment away from question times. So Elise, are there any questions that have been offered?
Yes, we do have another question. So in regard to communicating impact, what kind of considerations should be made at the development stage?
Again, if you sit down with your evaluator at the very beginning, probably one of the first things they'll want to talk to you after they kind of get the gist of the nature of your project is they'll probably want to talk to you about a logic model. And a logic model is basically a table that, or it could be a figure that maps the outcomes and the outputs of your project to the activities and the inputs. And so when doing a logic model, an evaluator is typically going to start at the right side of the diagram that says, at these different stages, so might be short term, midterm, and long term, we'll expect to achieve these different outcomes and then work backwards from there. So, what would be the outputs at different stages? And those are your more kind of tangible deliverables. And then you start asking the questions that kind of help form the meat and potatoes of the project itself. What activities are going to get us these deliverables? What activities are going to get us to accomplish these outcomes? And you start to fill in that. And that's very helpful because I think a lot of people think of a logic model only when they think about evaluation, but I use it regularly when coaching project teams on proposal development, on developing programs and initiatives. We start with a logic model because it really helps you focus your activities and it helps to keep you from throwing the kitchen sink at whatever it is that you're doing. You know that there are 50 best practices out there for what it is you're trying to accomplish, but how do you focus yours specifically on the outcomes that you're trying to attain? And so this logic model that your evaluator will help you work through is something that's a great planning tool. So you get all of those activities and then you work another step backwards in the chart all the way on the left side. Then you're looking at, okay, now what do I need as inputs to make these activities possible? And so that's one thing that your evaluator can help you do right off the bat when you're conceptualizing your project.
And in conversations that I've had with you on similar topics, one of the words that you've used that I really like is the intentionality. So, and I think that's what you're reflecting in the logic model. It's not just this evaluation that's separate, but using it for the project development and being very intentional in thinking about what you're trying to accomplish.
Absolutely. And I'll add this, some solicitations will ask you to include a logic model. Try to create space to include one, even if it's not asked for, because it just shows an extra level of thought and intentionality that's gone into the way that you've designed your project to work.
Right. Very good point. Let's go into the last topic that we wanted to cover for today, which is the unexpected findings. As you've been talking about, things don't necessarily go the way that you plan. And so the question to you is really, how should project teams handle evaluation findings when it's not what they expected, or maybe not even what they wanted?
Yes. And maybe I'll start with the not what they wanted. Well, sometimes not. Certainly, when you get findings that you don't want, they're unexpected, right? And so there are four different things to think about here. One is how we can shift our frame in terms of how we're viewing evaluation. As we've mentioned, it's not this real external piece. It's really integral to your project success. And so when we shift our frame to think of it in that way, we start to think about things a little bit differently and our relationship with the evaluator. And I would say think of your evaluator as that good friend or that trusted colleague who will not just flatter you, but who can sit down and have a conversation and tell you the truth about yourself. Because, sometimes we just have to have those moments with those people who can tell us like it is. And so if we think about that and think about how we would accept feedback from a loved one or a trusted colleague who's trying to look out for the best for us, and in this case, our project, that helps us go a long way with accepting those unexpected findings, especially when there are things we don't want to see. And then the next thing is thinking about how and actually, if you'll click the next one as well, because these two really go hand in hand. Really understanding reality. We cannot run away from reality. I used the hurdle example earlier, but I will use another very real example for me, and that is, how we try to avoid the reality of challenges we're facing. For me, it's when I go into the bathroom every morning and that scale is right there to my left when I go in. And I don't want to get on that scale because I don't want to face the reality of what those little numbers are going to tell me. And so, but the thing is, by not getting on the scale, I'm just avoiding it, and it's not helping things get better. And so I have to be able to and be willing to say, hey, let me step on this scale and get the reality and then accept what the reality is. And so it's the same thing with the evaluation findings. When there are things that aren't going exactly like we planned, we can't deal with anything that we can't acknowledge. So if I can't acknowledge those numbers on the scale, I can't do anything about them. And same thing with evaluation results. We have to be able to take them, process them, and then and accept them as fact, and then figure out the next part, and that is how we do the very hard work to move forward and to correct where we need to correct. And again, going back to that continuous improvement cycle, how do we continue to grow and evolve? And let me put this other spin on it, because I know we don't like talking about the negative, but it's necessary. But also, you can have unexpected findings and unexpected things come up that are really good things. In one project that I worked on, if you looked at our process evaluation, it would tell you we were behind schedule and we hadn't gotten to this stage of the research yet, and we hadn't done these things that we were supposed to have done by these milestones. But what ended up happening that caused those delays was when we did some initial data collection, we found some interesting things in our data that led to an unplanned first year conference paper that ended up winning a Best Paper Award. And so that's one of those unexpected things that came along the way that was a really good thing that had a really good outcome for our project and produced an extra output that we hadn't even planned on. And so, but there are sometimes things, whether it's with progressing towards your outcome, it might be something with your team dynamic that you really need to fix. And so be willing to sit and grapple with those findings and use your evaluator because trust me, we've seen a lot of things. You can use us to kind of be a sounding board and say, hey, it's not just about us providing this, the feedback, but we can also provide input on recommendations on how you get past this hurdle.
Those are all really great points. And I think that you're right. Sometimes we think of the unexpected as negatives, but they're also positives. So we are close to, we're at time, so we can't get to the last question segment, but we will follow up by email with any questions. And Yvette, I just want to thank you so much for being with us today and sharing of your insights. And I will try to do a quick summary of some of the points that you've brought up. One, in regards to using evaluation in terms of helping to improve processes and outcomes. And in a very related vein, that to be able to optimize project implementation, using evaluation to be able to inform project level decision making. And then also really important is grapple with the evaluation findings, whether it's what you're expecting or not, grapple with it. And if it's in a positive or negative, just making sure that you're actually looking at it. So Yvette, do you have any kind of quick final thoughts here before we wrap up?
No, I just want to say thank you again for inviting me. This was great, and I actually did have coffee during my coffee break, so thank you.
Very good. Well, thank you. And just real quickly before we go, everyone mark your calendar for our next coffee break webinar, which will be in October, which is still telling me I have to write that. 4 tips to reduce the grant proposal frenzy. So everyone have a great rest of the day, and thank you so much for joining us. Talk to you soon.